Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Welsh Government export webinar talking about routes to market. Looking forward to having a good session with you this morning. A little bit of housekeeping rules, if we may. Firstly, you should know that this is going to be recorded and will also be uploaded onto the Business Wales export zone. So we'll be sharing the links afterwards that you can share with any of your colleagues that might be interested to participate. I'm going to ask you to open up the chat function on the Zoom platform so that you can see any questions that are coming in, and of course for you to hold your own questions in there. We will take questions at the end in a Q&A session, which we will moderate for you. One of my colleagues will be available to go through that with you shortly. But as I say, please put your questions in that chat box and we will address those at the end of the session. Any questions that are unanswered, we will respond to you by email at a later point. So without further ado, I'm going to give an introduction to Tony Agrawal of Kinetic Cube, who is a specialist in trade development, has been working with companies in Wales for many years. We also have an additional session at the end of our main presentation today, a Brexit bulletin and Q&A by Andy Baker of Strong and Heard. So again, questions that you have for Andy, please use the chat function if you don't mind. Tony, I'll pass over to you to get us started into routes to market.
Thank you very much. So routes to market, what do you mean by routes to market? That's what we'll be talking about today, but the various forms of routes to market is very much the focus. Who are Kinetic Cube? Next slide, please. Who are Kinetic Cube? We are long-term providers of trade support to the Welsh Government and companies and organisations in Wales. We have been providing those services over the past 20 years. And certainly over the last decade alone, we've assisted more than 500 Welsh organisations go international across all sectors, all markets, organisations of all types and sizes. Who am I? I've spent since university 35 years working in business development. Last 25 years being in international business development. And the last 20 years assisting Welsh companies and indeed companies from other locations as well go international. So it's my great pleasure to be here with you this morning to talk about routes to market. Next, please. So market entry routes. What do we mean by that? We mean, how do you sell? How do you get to sell your product or service to a customer? Think of it, another name would be distribution channels. Next, please. So what we're going to discuss today, we're going to talk about learning objectives, the various modes of selling overseas. Typically, those would be things like selling directly, just doing that yourself, over a distance, either through electronic means or visiting customers yourself, using an agent, a distributor, or an importer, partnership of some format. So we're going to explore those various ways right now, and if you think about it, this is exactly what you do already for your existing domestic business. You you devise a business model in terms of which addresses how you actually sell your offering to a customer. For some of you, that will be direct because they're on your doorstep. For others, it might be using distributors or agents, whoever is best placed to service that customer. So that's the idea of doing this internationally. Isn't different to what we're doing domestically, but there is a fundamental difference in that by doing it internationally, the circumstances are different, and that's what we're going to look at today. Next, please. Now, as I said at the outset, I've had the pleasure of doing this for 20 years. And until, I'd say, 10 years ago, really the routes to market had been much the same as it always been since the war. So you've got various possibilities of setting, of accessing the markets, and really exporting until the 90s, I'd say, was really very much a prerogative of bigger organisations. Smaller companies found it much harder to export. because typically you'd need to have be of a certain size to have that infrastructure. You might possibly sell through distributors or an agent, or more likely you'd actually set up your own distributor subsidiary overseas to service that market. And so when we think of international brands like BP or Tesco or Marks and Spencer's or Vodafone, let's say, they would have the whereabouts, the capabilities of setting up their own business structure overseas. So that was fine for them. What has happened has been that the barriers to entry have been dramatically lowered over the last 2 to 3 decades. So effectively, it makes it much easier for small and medium-sized companies to export, which is why you have a session like this, which is why we see many more SMEs from Wales and indeed many other countries, particularly from Europe, for whom exports are a major part of their business. But just a reminder of what the old school routes are for selling overseas. You can either go direct to clients, that's perhaps the easiest way. You can work with an agent, you can have a distributor, you can have a reseller, depending upon what you're selling. You can set up your own overseas presence, and typically you'd be going on trade missions, which are a bit difficult today, but they'll come back. Or you could go to trade shows and exhibitions. And again, if you stop and think about this, you actually do quite a lot of that anyway. You just happen to do it here in your home market. So let's just refresh our memories in terms of what those traditional routes are before we talk about some of the new trends that we're seeing. Next, please. So if you're selling products, you typically sell directly from some sort of base. You could either do that from a physical base or an online base or some sort of telephone base. You could sell via distributors or via resellers. So there are many ways of doing that, and you choose the one that is right for you. Services, you may be selling direct, reacting to inquiries, or there may be referrals that others have made to you coming from partner organisations. Fundamentally, export markets differ to the UK markets in that the market may differ by the ways it operates, which is most likely to be the case: rules, regulations, pricing, language, culture. And also, your footprint in those markets will not be the same as your footprint in your domestic markets. You live here, you work here, you have your team here. You're not going to have the benefit of that in an overseas market unless you recreate that. So you're missing various components of what you already have here in the UK. So for those reasons, the routes to market that you have in the UK may be different to routes to market you have overseas. Typically in the UK, you may well sell directly to your clients because you don't need to have a third party. In Europe, in international markets, you probably will need to have other resources at hand, a partnership of some sort, a distributor, an agent, to help you to achieve that. Bear in mind that all these options, these routes to market, offer many choices, but there are also trade-offs. So if you have a third party involved, a distributor, an agent, etc., then you will have to sacrifice your margin, some of your margin, for that. But alternatively, if you were to go directly, you'd also have the cost of finding those customers and serving them directly. So if you think about it, one offsets the other. The choices you make are very much dependent upon your business model and the market you're selling to. Next, please. So let's go with the easy one, which is often a way that we start to do things by ourselves and then begin to mature and take on additional local resources and parties. For this, you'd be selling directly to the marketplace, either by visiting the marketplace, servicing clients directly, or servicing clients, particularly if you're product-based, by online means, selling directly to clients. So you take the order and you'd take payments, and then you deliver if you were having a product. If you're selling a service, then you probably have to negotiate the terms of payments. A service is much harder to get advance payment for because it is intangible. So it does become more challenging for those who are selling services. The positives, the pros for this is what you invoice is what you get to keep yourself. That's a great thing. But more importantly, you actually get to know who your customer is. You can develop that relationship. The downside, of course, is you need to find those customers yourselves. You're not close enough to know what that marketplace is wanting. And also you carry the risk of non-payments, and suing somebody overseas for non-payment often is not worth the trouble at all. Now, we are going to talk about the challenges of doing this versus going for other means. So let me talk about that on the next slide. So if you find somebody to help you, you can go with by having an agent. An agent is somebody who is going to help you find those customers, service those customers, knocking on their door, being the point of contact for you, dealing with any inquiries about either pre-sales, during the installation, or post-sales. So they have a very important role to play. Particularly if they are from that industry, they would know the clients well, one would hope. However, an agent is investing their time and effort into this, and that comes as a cost. So it's important to realise that, again, there are trade-offs. Also, a key distinction to bear in mind is an agent is not the invoicing party. You are invoicing the customer, so you have that direct relationship with the customer contractually, so you are responsible. The agents you are paying a fee or a commission to. Next, please. The positives of having an agent is they're in market, they know their marketplace, they'll be developing relationships, and they can provide valuable feedback to you. The downside, of course, is the relationship with the customer is largely with the agents. And moreover, agents are not going to invest a lot of their time and effort, and particularly their out-of-pocket expenses, if they're going to have to travel around the marketplace on your behalf, if they're not being rewarded, if not being compensated. And furthermore, particularly in the European Union, agents can be considered as employees, so you are still liable for their taxes and holiday benefits and so forth. One of the challenges we're seeing with finding with agents as well now is it's just becoming very hard to find agents. They've always been difficult to find. They tend to be invisible. And agents are becoming a dying breed, we find. Very few people want to work on this flexible arrangement. People want, as you can understand, as somebody who's acting as a sales agent for you in the UK would want, is they want a certain minimum income regardless of the orders. So those two things are tending to push agents, the traditional commission-based agents, out of the frame, and seeking such people is becoming very, very difficult indeed. Next, please. The other possibility, of course, is having a distributor and or an importer. Now, in some markets, you have to have an importer. It's a legal necessity, somebody who takes, who clears the goods for you, takes ownership of those goods, or certainly stores the goods, and then it either is the distributor themselves to many other customers, a fragmented client base, or the importer would service other distributors, acting almost, if you like, as a master distributor, and then selling it on to others, distributors, who then sell on to the end customer. So the distinction between a distributor / importer is they buy the products from you, they take ownership of the products, they sell to who they like normally, unless you're able to control that. And they are the ones who have that relationship with the customer. Now, there are some challenges with having a distribution also, which I'm going to speak about on the next slide. So, a distributor, if you have the right distributor, should be able to fast track you and get your products, because distributors and importers are predominantly needed for product-based companies. We'll be able to fast track you and because they're active in the marketplace, and be able to get your products to their existing customer base because they already have one, presumably. It should be easier for you if you use a distributor. It should be cheaper for you because for you to send out 1,000 single unit orders to 1,000 different customers will be quite expensive versus sending out one shipment to one organisation, which then does that in market. So there are some benefits there to be had. However, there are some downsides to be aware of, is that distributors may not be acting only for you. They may be acting for other products, and distributors, like any other business, are interested in those things that they can sell with the least cost, the least effort. So what is it that can make them the most money fastest? So they are going to give priority to those principles that they work for. Secondly, a distributor certainly could almost act as a block for you. And this is a case in point in the Gulf markets, where you have to have a distributor, a partner. That distributor might deliberately work with you or be your distributor, only to block you. And once you have a relationship in the Gulf markets, then you find yourself being effectively locked out unless you buy them out. It's almost like having a leasehold situation, a freehold versus a leasehold. You find yourself trapped. So you have to be very careful in the choice of distributors. And to make that matter even more complicated in today's environment, distributors are finding that they're being squeezed by other competitors who we'll speak about shortly today. And as a result, they are being highly selective in terms of what they're prepared to buy. After all, it is their money, or upon what terms. They might even insist that they don't own the stock, that you own the stock. They take the stock on consignment, and if it doesn't sell, it comes back to you. So as a result of that, we're finding that distributors are being highly selective, often choosing those products which are higher value and offer the opportunity of service as well, so that there's an opportunity to make more money. Often we find distributors are no longer interested in Me Too products where they're highly commoditized and margins are very low because they simply cannot compete with other rivals. And very finally, I would say to you that all too often we find that distributors are order takers and not order makers. So you yourself still have to carry on investing time and effort to make those sales, to get that process up and running. And one observation I'd like to share with you is that one of the biggest sources of upset we find with Welsh companies is that they come back to Welsh government a year or two after signing up with a distributor, saying that they're not too pleased with the results of that relationship. And often it's down to a number of factors. Number one, the market may not be the right market for them. Or more likely, number two, the distributor simply is not bothered because it's not worth the trouble for them. Or as likely, number three, is that the principal, i.e. the company, has not actually supported the distributor in terms of making that market. If you've already started to make a market, you'll find it much easier to find a distributor because they have momentum to run with. If they're having to start from ground zero, there's a bigger upfront cost for them. So please bear that in mind. So those are the merits of having an agent or a distributor, but there are other routes. So let's talk briefly about that. So I've spoken about that. So partnerships. So slide 17. So a partnership is a different form of entering a market. This particularly works well for knowledge-based companies, those who are selling services, design sorts of companies, lawyers, any sort of professional services, because this is where you have some sort of partnership with others in market, those who are complementary to you, they have a customer base, they have that in-depth local market expertise, networks that they can leverage. And each partner brings something to the table and they focus upon what they do best. Obviously, there is because it's a partnership, like any partnership you'd have here, you share the risks and rewards. You come together, you pool your resources where it makes sense. And you can even take that partnership and go beyond that country. Together, you could go to third-party markets as well, because you're sharing the risks and rewards. It makes sense. In terms of what partnerships, what partners might bring to such a relationship, some may contribute technology, capacity, warehousing, capital, knowledge. So it can be whatever makes sense. Valuing the partnership in terms of how the risks and rewards are split, that becomes more challenging, and it's something you need to think about very, very carefully. And of course, by having somebody locally in market, it may make it easier if they are the ones can gather transaction selling to the customer, because at the end of the day, it'll be easier for them to make claims against the customer. And also often a customer in market would prefer to have a local supplier rather than a foreign supplier in the event of any warranty claims. Now, it is a highly competitive global marketplace. As I said at the outset, in the last century, international business was largely held by big companies. Today, in this century, many small and micro businesses can go international, and we see more and more of that every day. Even companies with very modest turnovers are able to do that. So it's important that you understand which route to market makes sense for you. And so I'm going to continue to speak a little bit further about the different forms of partnership. So some of these are relevant for products, and some of these I'll speak about are more relevant for high IP sorts of products. So licensing, I'm sure you're very familiar with licensing, where you grant the right to another party so that they can legally make use your proprietary technology to go into the marketplace, and you see that quite often. Franchising is another form of licensing, in effect, where you give somebody the right to franchise to use your branding, and that you typically see with in the retail sector, for example, where companies are given that right. Cross licensing is where you're giving the licensing opportunity to another party for them to use your IP, and they're doing it the other way around. Again, that can work pretty well in terms of connecting, in terms of building that strong partnership link for people to collaborate. And in a similar vein, cross manufacturing, where you make some components under license for your partner, and they do the same for you. And those sorts of partnerships are highly intertwined. There is mutual benefit, and both parties succeed by working together very closely. Next slide, please. So co-marketing, again, you can be marketing one of those products and services where you might take a fee for success, or vice versa. Co-production in a similar vein, where you're producing for one another, using the skills that somebody has for one part, and you provide the skills for another part. So similar sort of idea. Now, there are many forms of partnership, as I keep saying. There's you may have heard the word joint venture. What does a joint venture mean? A joint venture is where you actually bring two or more organizations together. They come together, they contribute something to that. Now, that may be to this new entity, which could be it could be capital, it could be IP, and you see many joint ventures all around. And particularly for some of our Welsh companies, we've seen a number of joint ventures whereby they are manufacturing in partnership with a local party. So the Welsh company will be providing their technology, their IP, maybe no capital, they'll provide training. and the local party will provide the distribution, or manufacturer provide the distribution and after service. It's very important with any form of partnership, whether it's a joint venture or any of the other forms of partnership, to think very carefully about this, because you're entering into a long-term arrangement. It's a marriage, so it's very important that there are proper legal agreements, and that lawyers give their viewpoints on that arrangement, because like a marriage, divorce can happen. So you need to know what the rules are when things like that can happen. So really very, very important to work out how to operate that partnership in the event of any problems. We do absolutely urge you to carry out your own due diligence, to make sure you know what you're signing up to before entering some of these things. I would urge you, please do not join a partnership simply on the basis of a handshake. That's fine for small sorts of things, but it can still go wrong. It can still go sour and cause great upset. For something which is bigger than that, it could be catastrophic to your business. So be very careful. Next, please. Okay, so I just wanted to share some examples of routes to markets for some sorts of organisations we work with without mentioning any names. As you would expect, in Wales, we see quite a number of service providers who specialise in very niche areas. Hypothetically, software solutions, legal services, specialist business support services, or technical support of one description or another. Those typically need to work in partnership with other organisations in the target market, because they can plug you into their total offering to their client base, and that can work pretty well. So you are part of a bigger offering, because what you offer in itself is not sufficient. It wouldn't be economically viable for you to try and sell that yourselves. So a partnership with a complementary provider absolutely makes sense. Conversely, for high volume consumer goods, something which is effectively selling lots of boxes, a distributor or an importer makes perfect sense. They have an ability to sell to a highly fragmented customer base, and to be able to take payment for those, which is something you don't want to do. You don't want to be making 1,000 invoices for £10, let's say. So in that scenario, you're far better using a partner who carries that headache, particularly if those sales are only ever going to be small volume, small value, that they're not so strategically important to you. Conversely, though, if you're in the low volume, high value area, and it could be consumer goods or other goods for that matter, if it's consumer goods, you probably sell directly online. We've had companies selling products which are typically £500 to £1,000 plus to a very niche marketplace, consumers, B2C. Maybe going online and generating your own traffic to your website is going to be the best way. If it's a service, then it could be through other means. Maybe it would be better to service directly through going to the marketplace yourself, or having or having some sort of web presence in that market to generate interest. So those are examples, and I'll be very happy to give you my suggestions for your business in the Q&A. I don't need to know company names because we are recording this, but if you'd like to give me a feel for the sorts of thing you do and which markets you're targeting, I'd gladly give you my suggestions. Next slide, please. So I thought we'd inject a little bit of fun. We're going to do a bit of polling here, if we may. So I'm going to ask you, please, a question: can you export a haircut? So a haircut as in snip, 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 and I'm going to just cover my hair up so to perhaps take away that. So have I had a haircut or not underneath this hat? Can you export a haircut? And I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds. Come on, more of you can answer. Just a bit of fun. Can you, yay or nay, export a haircut? Okay, any more for any more? Okay, well, let's end the polling. I can tell you that 75% of you said, no, you cannot export a haircut. Well, it's a difficult challenge, isn't it? How do you export a haircut? Can you export a haircut? No, because when I go for a haircut, I go to my local barber who cuts my hair. How can he export a haircut? Well, in a traditional way, they can't export a haircut. So the 75% of you who said no, they can't. In a way, you're absolutely right. But maybe there's a different way to do this. So here are some alternative suggestions as to how you possibly could export a haircut. So next slide, please. So you can't physically export it because you can't. However, you could actually go overseas and cut somebody's hair. That's another way. Would have to be worth doing, of course. So if it would have to be somebody who's prepared to pay you to send you off in their private jet for you to cut their hair. If you're well known enough, you could franchise your brand. And if you think about it, brands like Andrew Collins have done that, exactly that. So you could franchise your brand, you could license it, or you could physically go there and cut somebody's hair. Alternatively, if you're so famous, somebody might come over to you and have their haircut at your premises. So if you're well known enough, yes, you can. And the reason I've given you this to think about is to show you that exporting is within the realms of all of us now. Exporting is no longer for those who are big enough to do this, which is how it would have been 20 plus years ago. Today, exporting is viable for 80% plus of all businesses. So let us not trap ourselves in terms of why we can't export. Next slide, please. Now, as I said at the outset, things have changed greatly over the past 20 years as I've been helping Welsh businesses to export. I've spoken to you about how things were traditionally in terms of using an agent, a distributor, selling, or doing it yourselves. But things have changed greatly in the sense of the internet has been a great disruptor in more ways than one. And that's certainly been true in the case of exporting as well. Now, I'd like to introduce you to other ways of exporting in terms of what has happened, internet. I'm going to speak to you briefly about the rise of Amazon Business, and my colleague and friend Matt, I'm going to ask him to chime in where he feels as he'd like to on this. If you just hold fire for a second, Matt. E-commerce is certainly something that many of we're all familiar with today. So that is something that has certainly changed in the last few years. Combined with those two things have meant that traditional routes to market like distributors and agents are disappearing rapidly. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have to find new ways of doing business. And this particularly applies for low value product offerings. High value, having an agent or a partnership absolutely still the only way. But for things which are being commoditized, then either e-commerce doing it yourselves or e-commerce via Amazon Business is something you need to be considering. So let us speak about what is going on next. Amazon. So we know Amazon have completely transformed the high street. Only this week we've had a tragic demise of Debenhams and Arcadia Group. It saddens me because in a life pre-consulting, I was actually a supplier to a KG group myself, but they just didn't move with the times. So we are where we are today. Amazon has revolutionized the way we buy things, and that has only accelerated with COVID. So this was happening pre-COVID, but since COVID, that trend has just accelerated completely. Some research I've has carried out on behalf of a number of our companies is found that Amazon are making a big move into this marketplace of distribution. So we know Amazon for the B2C market online. Some of you may not be aware, but Amazon is trying to replicate that same success in the B2B marketplace, which is estimated just in the United States, I believe, to be a $5 trillion market. Matt, would you like to comment here?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So I can just jump in on that. We've been helping Welsh companies with e-commerce routes to market for about 5 years now. And as you'd expect, originally, a lot of those companies were more in the consumer space. And when we first started looking at Amazon Business was a couple of years ago. I tell this story because I think it's very illustrative. We were working with a fasteners company, Mid Wales, fairly traditional business, second generation, family owned, traditional route to market distributors. Really nice company. You know, fasteners are all over the place, all over the world, really. You know, high value products, all kinds of, you know, public buildings, public spaces, hospitals, jails, and anywhere you'd expect, you know, security and secure fasteners to be in demand. And they'd asked us to look into the US market for them originally to find distributors, but also sort of as an offhanded request to look into how the market was changing. And this is really when we were first clued into Amazon Business and the way that some of the changes which have disrupted the retail space so greatly are now having a big, massive role in the B2B sector. So I think it's easy to look at something like Amazon and think, oh, well, that, you know, that's not really for me, or that's not necessarily how I would see myself exporting. And while it's important to understand, I think that, you know, Amazon has definite pros and cons. It's not necessarily the right platform for everybody. It might not be the right platform for your products. It's fundamentally changing the marketplace in a way that is going to be relevant, because as Tony mentioned, we are starting to see a lot of traditional distributors fall by the wayside. So there's a lot of consolidation in the distribution space, an increasing amount, as the smaller distributors find it harder to keep up with a world where they're expected to have a sophisticated digital offering, where they need to have a certain amount of scale and reach to compete with the likes of Amazon moving into B2B. Yeah. I think it's also very interesting to note, Amazon in the United States is now a top 20 industrial distributor. That would have been astonishing just a few years ago, to think that, you know, Amazon, which again, we see mostly as a retail e-commerce platform, is actually a top 20 industrial distributor as well. And the reason for that is Amazon Business. Concurrently with this webinar series with WG right now, we're also running an dedicated e-commerce webinar series for the Northwest of England. So we've been, you know, sort of updating our research and understanding of Amazon Business. And yeah, I wanna just, you know, put this out there, because I in the 2 years since we've really been researching B2B e-commerce, Amazon's only gotten more sophisticated. So I don't want to make it seem like this entire story is about Amazon. It's not necessarily, but the fact is more and more of B2B business is moving online. And as a company, it's really, really important to be aware of these changes, and basically to put yourself in a position where you're able to adapt to the change. So highly recommend, you know, if you're curious to kind of look more at the Amazon Business offering and sort of understand what that looks like and the types of customers they're serving. I'm just going to drop the link into the chat. This is to their specifically to their Amazon, to their B2B platform, and you'll kind of see I think it's very sobering in a lot of ways, not just to see what the offer is, but Amazon is now becoming a preferred procurement partner for all kinds of municipalities, all kinds of companies. And important to note, it's not just in the US, it's pretty much US, Western Europe, India, and Japan at this stage. So it's all over the world. And if you have been following Amazon at all in the last 20 years, as we kind of all have, in the way it's taken over so much of our lives as consumers, you know that if they see an opportunity, they're not going to stop. So, you know, important to ride the wave as opposed to being left behind.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. On this particular side, you can see Amazon is gathering momentum, hence the reason that they're in the top 20 distributors. You can see they have the mechanism, the capability to stock millions of lines, SKUs, and they've got the mechanism to deliver. So clearly distributors just don't have that bandwidth to compete with Amazon Business. Next slide. Just as an example here, you can see how much you can compare Amazon SKU holdings just for some selected products we were looking at. See how much Amazon is holding versus how much a traditional organization would be holding. The orange is what you see there. The orange there is Amazon, and the blue, that blue segment, pie, is what a traditional big distributor is holding. You can see the sheer scale difference between Amazon and a traditional big distributor of that. So for products which are becoming commoditized, Amazon Business is will become the go-to platform for many. Next, please. So the Amazon threat again here, you can see that it's becoming a major threat to so many distributors. And again, we're seeing distributors becoming very picky about what they want to stock. So they want to stock things where there's products where they are unique, where it's a lower volume, higher value, and more associated higher value support services, rather than stocking things which are purely commoditized. So next one, please. So sorry, go up again. Sorry, down, I beg your pardon. Oops. So the price comparison. So you can see the price comparison slide. You can see, as an example, this is a component. It's some sort of electrical box. And you can see the difference between Amazon's price, prime delivery included, so $45.20 delivered, versus going to a B2C distributor at $62. Obviously, the distributor has to make more money. They're not going to sell volume. They have more overheads per unit compared to Amazon Business. So Amazon is changing the fundamental dynamics of distribution. And so for a company, I think, who is actually on this call today, some of their products which are more lower end of their business probably would lend themselves to being on an e-commerce platform, be it their own or a distributor platform or an Amazon platform. But their higher value products, which require more service, would lend themselves to being using a different route to market rather than Amazon. Amazon is where you go when you just want to buy things quickly and cheaply. So that is the Amazon thread, which takes us neatly to the next slide, which are the 21st century routes to market. So as I say, 20 years of helping Welsh businesses, and we can see the fundamental difference is that today the marketplace is more open, it's more equitable. Anybody can go online and sell. How successful they are, that is a different matter. But fundamentally, they can have their own website or use an existing platform like Shopify, for example, or use an Amazon platform if they so wish. And so e-commerce is now changing the world of product selling, and even for some lower value services, it is changing things as well. Now, some of you may have been on the e-commerce webinar that Matt gave on 24th of November. If you were not, it's available on the Business Wales website. If you'd like to learn more about that, where Matt speaks, presents an overview of the do's and don'ts, the nuts and bolts of e-commerce, if you would like to know more. And I'm sure that Welsh Government will be more than happy to assist further. So at this stage, as we're coming up to 10 to 12, I would invite us, if I may, to the next slide to begin to wrap this bit up and go on to Q&As. So before we go into Q&As, think of your questions, please, as I wrap up on the key takeaways, which it would appear scary. There are very many ways of exporting. It's about finding the route which is right for you, and that route might differ by market, and it might differ by what it is you're selling. So one route might be e-commerce with an Amazon. Another route for something higher value might be through your own website. It just depends. We know that distributors are a dying breed, and agents are almost non-existent today in reality. So a distributor is going to be highly selective in terms of who they're going to take on. They will be demanding from you. So the power has shifted from the supplier to the customer or the intermediary. We see that with Amazon already. The power is no longer with the producer, unless you're producing vaccines or PPE at the moment. Advanced partnerships are certainly a way for many of you which are in a higher value arena. That's going to be the best way for you to make inroads. Those take a lot more effort, a lot more investments of time, relationship development. And fundamentally, for a number of you, in reality, you're not going to be able to find that right partnership. Actually selling directly yourself is going to be the way forward. You're going to have to do that yourselves, and I would suggest to you to define your marketplace very carefully. Try and do it in a very efficient way, knowing who you're going to sell to. Do it in a way whereby it's in a region which you can get to and service quickly or efficiently rather, so that you can take control. So it's almost another domestic market, if you like. It is. There are many possibilities. Nothing is easy, but at the same time, the barriers to entry have been dramatically reduced. So there is, for me, very few reasons why businesses should not be exporting today. Many more businesses can export and should be exporting, particularly to diversify their customer base. So with that said, I'd like to move to Q&A, please, and invite questions, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and moderate the questions.
Okay.
Please, if you have questions for Tony, I'd urge you to put them in the chat. We do have a question here from Andrew, which I'll get to in a moment, but I'd encourage you, everyone on the call, to don't be shy. Put your questions in the chat, and I'll go ahead and go through them one by one. So Tony, first of all, why don't we just look at Andrew's question. Andrew asked, Brexit and COVID are causing enormous challenges to businesses. Are you finding agents, distributors, partners, etc., keen to work with UK companies at the moment? Or, are we sort of, in a bit of a difficult situation there still? What's your sort of take on the ability of UK companies to work with international partners, given the turbulent undercurrents of our current moment?
Great question, Andrew. I'm assuming there's two parts to this. There's European partners and non-European partners. non-European partners, we're definitely seeing opportunities and interest from those countries where Britain has struck trade deals, so likes of Australia, Japan, Canada now, and a whole range of eclectic markets in Africa and so forth. So we're definitely seeing that. COVID for sure has dampened demand. However, with the rise of the vaccine, perhaps with some semblance of normality returning to the United States, we are seeing 2021 look much brighter than it was looking, let's say, 3 or 4 months ago, a month ago even, dare I say. In the background, you've also got the clean tech agenda, and that's carried on going with or without COVID. But to answer your fundamental question about Brexit, because I think that's what this is about, is I think with Brexit, we're going to see the route to market for some of our companies being to actually set up a base in the European Union to service the European Union, because they won't be able to do that from the UK anymore. And we're seeing the converse the other way around as well. So it just very much depends. Here and now, we don't know what Brexit's going to look like. Although very soon, in 5 minutes' time, we're going to move over to Andy Baker from Strong and Her to give us what Brexit, the known implications of Brexit. Maybe next week when Andy comes back on the 10th of December, we might actually know more if there is a Brexit deal. But fundamentally, we're always going to get these changes, and we just have to roll with them and be prepared. We need to be flexible. That's the key. We need to be flexible to anything that happens. Next question. I think it's for you, Matt.
It is for me, yeah. So Damon asks, Matt, can you quickly run through an example of the B2B e-commerce platforms? So the short answer is yes, I can. I don't have the screen right now. I think probably easier to just keep it that way. But if you click on the image that I sent, that is a graphic that comes from a source called Applico. If you're interested to read more about B2B e-commerce, this has been a big source of our research. I would say they're kind of like the biggest follower of the B2B e-commerce sector in terms of information. They've done a lot of the kind of collating of research on Amazon and also on sort of the platform economy in general. Anyway, if you have a look at that graphic, you can see different B2B e-commerce platforms across all different sectors of the economy. So if you look at wide category, you can even see, like Amazon Business, eBay actually has its own business supply portal as well, which is also sort of geared toward industrial supplies, something to look into. Another example that I was sort of further turned on to just the other day was in our e-commerce webinars for the Northwest of England, we had a company, guy who's importing superfood products from South America and selling them into the UK and Europe. We just did our session on B2B e-commerce the other day. In that webinar series, I showed this graphic, and during some independent working time that's sort of built in as a part of our session, he went and actually set up an account on BioLinked, which if you look under the food box is another example of a platform, and that's one that sort of focuses specifically on organic foods. I know that food and drink is a big export from Wales. I'm not sure if there are any food and drink companies on the call today, but that's an example of a platform that I think has a lot of potential as well. But you'll find that across all of the sectors there are different platforms. But I would urge you all really to start your B2B e-commerce journey by looking a little bit more at what Amazon is doing and just getting a full appreciation for the scope of market and customers they're going after, because I think that will help you to really understand what's happening with this this trend across the B2B space. I hope that answers your question.
Matt, I'd just like to add to that, perhaps, is the question from Damon. Good to hear from you, Damon. It was actually your company where we'd raised this topic of Amazon Business earlier on this year. And I think that Amazon Business is still largely a unknown, but it is something that's coming very quickly, and it's something that we need to be very aware of. So ask yourself the question, does your products, which of your products, if any, should be on those sorts of platforms versus other platforms? So not everything would be on the same platform is the point I'm making.
And very, very important to add to that, Tony, is Amazon Business is going for some pretty large scale customers, and there's a change happening in procurement generally where, again, it's strange to say this, but it's true. Amazon is starting to become a go-to procurement platform for major Fortune 500 companies, as well as large-scale public organizations. So I was absolutely astonished to learn, for example, the other day that 40% of the 100 largest municipalities in the United States now use Amazon as their procurement portal for various industrial and business to business sort of supplies. And again, if you click on the link in the chat, business.amazon.com, they've sort of I think they're making more of an effort to tell the public story of Amazon Business right now, and of course Amazon's got plenty of money to do so. And you'll see that there's a lot of sort of case studies from major companies that are switching over to Amazon, much as we saw in the retail space over the last couple of decades, due to reasons of convenience, cost, all the same factors. So worth taking a look at that, and again, just to get a sense of the full scope of what's happening here.
Thanks. I'm conscious of time as well, Matt, and I know we've got Andy Baker waiting. We've got a couple of polls we'd like to ask people. So poll number 1, this is about Brexit, because we're about to move on to the Brexit side. So are you prepared for Brexit? So can you please answer yes, completely ready, partially, but wanting to know what the deal is, and no. And the answer is, just give us a couple of seconds more, is very good, excellent. We'll close the poll. 100% of you are partially prepared, but waiting to know what the deal is, as I think we all are. So Andy, that might help you, but I suspect that you might still want to speak about customs declarations and the like. And question number 3 rather, what concerns you most about Brexit?
And Tony, while the folks are answering there, I want to turn Andy on to a question we had earlier, which is definitely Brexit related, from Monica here in the chat. My main question is, given that a big part of our business is oriented towards Europe, and one of the main means of accessing contracts is through tenders, how are we going to be able to participate in European tenders after Brexit? One of the issues we have is every tender requires an ESPD, European Single Procurement Document, but after Brexit, British companies are only going to have access to the SPD, so without the European, naturally. And Monica's trying to find out whether this is going to be equivalent or considered to be equivalent. Obviously, this might depend on the deal, but Monica's company is already preparing for tenders that will end in 2021. And so just looking to find out some more information about whether they're still going to be eligible for those tenders, or whether they might need to find a different route, for example, going through a local agent in Europe who would have access to the tenders. So actually a Brexit question, but I think some interesting insight into some of the various routes to market that Tony discussed, and the situations where you might need an agent, perhaps in the future, certainly for European selling. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
In terms of that, obviously we don't know what the deal will be, if there will even be a deal. Before Brexit, you were, as a member of the European Union, you were eligible to bid for such tenders. We don't know what the situation will be, of course. However, it's often better to have a lead party in the market concerned, where the client is to be leading on that tender. So I would suggest to you that it's probably going to be worth thinking about either having a partner to be the lead moving forward, or to set up your own base, which we're seeing from others, actually setting up their own business presence in the European Union. Ireland and the Netherlands are probably the most popular choices for that here and now. So without knowing what your business is, which is beyond the scope of this webinar, those would be my generic high-level recommendations. Happy to chat outside the list, of course. If I may just go back to question 3 then. As an exporter, what concerns you most for Andy's benefit? 75% are concerned about costs, duties, what those duties might be. 50% are concerned with delays, logistics, and 25% are, well, the numbers don't quite add up. 25% are concerned about documentation, customs declarations. So hopefully, Andy, that gives you a feel, but duties are clearly the #1 priority.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you.
With that said, Andy, we will move forward with our slides and pass over to the Brexit Bulletin, and just a brief introduction, Andy, from yourself, and perhaps you'd be kind enough to tell us what we must know and what we might expect, please.
What we might expect, of course. So, good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, my name's Andy Baker. I work for Strong & Heard, Customs and Trade International Trade Advisor. My previous background to working for Strong & Heard was 19 years in freight forwarding. Predominantly 17 of them years was air freight imports, with 2 years of road freight and sea freight imports. So obviously my background, customs clearance, majority imports, with the odd exports. Obviously working now for Strong & Heard, we also cover export and import training. In terms of what is happening from January onwards with deal or no deal, I think the most important thing to remember here is, irrespective of if we have a deal or not, there will be export and import entries. So that's the most important thing to remember. So in 10 days' time, when the deal is done and everything's hunky-dory with the European Union and the UK, the only thing really that's going to change in terms of moving your goods is duties. VAT will still be applicable on both export and import. So for an export from the UK to the EU, VAT will still be applicable, paying on, obviously, to be paid on import. And any products that are arriving from the EU to the UK, again, if there's a trade deal and obviously there's no duty involved, we'll still have VAT to pay. So documentary wise, for you as businesses now, obviously there's going to be extra costs both for import and export entries. One thing to be aware of is obviously your Incoterms. So Incoterms, whereas currently they are necessary in terms of contract with your clients. However, one thing to be aware of that come obviously the 1st of January, if you are using DDP, for example, and obviously whereby you would be the importer into the European Union, so you're exporting your products from the UK, under DDP Incoterms, you would also be the importer into the European Union, whereby you would then have to have an EU EORI number, and you would also have to be VAT registered in the member state that you export the goods to. Now, it's also important to remember that the goods, if they're not using transit, so if you're not using the transit facility, so customs transit, under the CTC agreement, that if your goods go into Calais, for example, then you must clear the goods in Calais, which basically then means that if you are exporting under DDP, you would have to be EU EORI registered in France or Holland or Ireland. You can have an EU EORI number, but you must be VAT registered in France. So that is causing major issues to supply chains, whereby EU customers currently, they just want obviously to purchase the goods as they would normally off you at a set price, and you would deliver the goods to them. We're finding quite a lot of our clients now, their EU customers do not want to deal with any duty, VAT, customs entries, extra documentation, which is forcing a lot of UK businesses down the DDP line, which is causing a lot of issues. So that's just one thing to be aware of, that if you can trade and avoid using DDP Incoterms, then that is of a benefit to you as a business. So that's one thing to be aware of. In terms of documents and preference, that comes down to deal or no deal, really. If we do have a trade deal with the European Union, then obviously we are looking at a UK EUR1 equivalent document that will be issued by UK Chamber of Commerce. If obviously there's no deal, then we're looking at trading with the European Union under WTO or MFN rates, most favoured nation rates. They're both the same rates, which can cause, again, cost to your clients, cost to your business, and ideally we do really need a deal, which would obviously have a lot of benefit to you as an exporter or an importer to and from the European Union. In terms of continuity agreements, as we know, the UK has multiple continuity agreements signed. HMRC published these continuity agreements earlier in the year. Unfortunately, a couple of months ago, if you go to try and find out the information now, HMRC removed the continuity agreements for review. So unfortunately, we know that there are continuity agreements. If you are looking for information such as what preference document do I need to provide from January onwards for a shipment going to Switzerland, for example, or a shipment going to South Korea, for example, or to Chile, along with obviously all the other continuity agreements. Unfortunately, things might change from what was initially published, so that is another thing to be aware of, that obviously what you've pre-planned earlier in the year might necessarily change, but obviously we are waiting for HMRC to obviously republish these continuity agreements after they've been reviewed. Is there anything else, Tony, you want me to go through? Any questions?
Well, I would invite questions from the audience, really. Yeah. Whilst we're waiting for those questions, Andy, perhaps I could ask a question. When we talk about a deal, I know information has been almost non-existent. Do we have any idea what that deal might actually be? They claim that 95% of a deal is ready, barring 3 particular points. Yeah. So let's assuming those 3 points are addressed. Do we know what the 95% of what's being agreed bar means? Yeah.
As far as we are aware, obviously there's certain holds up in terms of fisheries and so on and so forth. I think one of the other stipulations is to do with UK businesses in the European Union, in terms of representation, obviously. However, the difficulty is that even though 95% of this trade deal might be done, there's still going to be little niggles in the background. So we might end up with a trade deal whereby only certain goods are tariff-free, which is possibly the likelihood, Tony, given how long these trade deals have been going on for. I personally don't expect a zero tariff over every single product. We might have, obviously, zero on some and reduced and still a full rate tariff. So that is one thing to be aware of. But like I've said, it's a waiting game really, and it's a waiting game for obviously what HMRC are going to release within the meantime, because I'm sure a lot of you still have a lot of outstanding questions, and we still have a lot of outstanding questions with HMRC and the Department for International Transport that still haven't been answered, still haven't been confirmed to us. A prime example is the UK Global Trade Tariff from January onwards. So any of you, if you've had a look at the UK Global Trade Tariff from January onwards, it currently doesn't have any measures in terms of anti-dumping duty, restrictions, licenses and so on. So again, we are literally in a waiting game, Tony, to find out between now and the 1st of December what is happening.
Are there things that businesses should be doing, accepting we're only 4 weeks away from departure, from transition? What things must businesses do with the known knowns?
With a no deal, Tony?
With the known knowns, knowing what we know today.
Knowing what we know, yeah, sure.
What should businesses absolutely be doing, or should already have in place?
Shut up, yeah. Right, first off, a GB EORI number, so that's the first thing you need to have in place. So obviously you cannot export goods if you do not have a GB EORI number. Secondly, you need to look at your supply chain in terms of your Incoterms, as I've discussed earlier.
Okay.
So DDP, please, if you can avoid using DDP Incoterms, please do. If any of you are sending goods to Northern Ireland, for example, then you would need to register on TSS, which is the Trader Support Service. Either yourselves, if you are raising the export entries, then you would need to register on TSS. Or if you are using a customs agent to move the product for you, then you would need to liaise with them to ensure they are registered for TSS. That's really my key points. If you are importing, then obviously you need to be aware of the simplifications from January onwards, and these can all be accessed and read on the border operation model, which is available on HMRC. It's a rather big read, unfortunately, but it covers the processes from January, April and July, and it also covers controlled goods. So if you are importing or exporting controlled goods, for example, it covers what you would need to do in terms of compliance and documentation, and also it covers certain things such as animal health certificates, and also what DEFRA will be doing in terms of the border control posts from January onwards. And also one recommendation from me, if you are exporting or importing any of the goods that are on the controlled goods list, so products of animal origin, food, drink, for example, please do register with DEFRA for their webinars. From January onwards, DEFRA will be introducing a system called IPAFS, which is APAFFS, and that will be a phased introduction. So if you register now for the webinars with DEFRA, they will be able to go through these with you. So what you as an exporter or an importer would need to complete, and how to register on them systems.
Okay, and we've had a question in regarding duties, as we know that was a major issue. In terms of rates, WTO/MFN, different rates for different things, of course, but typically what sort of duty rates are we talking of?
Well, the easiest way to find out what these rates are is if you go to the UK trade tariff as it is now, and if you look at your commodity code, because obviously we're still a part of the European Union. If you look at the third country duty rate, that will be the rate for the MFN rate into the EU.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way for you as an exporter or an importer to obviously locate what the MFN rate into the EU will be from January onwards.
Okay, and if I understand correctly, even if the UK applies zero duties on imports, it doesn't mean to say that there are zero duties when exporting from the UK to the EU.
Correct, Tony. Correct. The EU can put any tariff rate on any product that they wish. The UK can do exactly the same.
But there's no discrimination. So we, as a third-party country, we would be applicable to third-party rates into the European Union, whether it's us or the United States. But as a sovereign country, so to speak, we could say all our duty rates are going to be zero from anywhere, but we can't discriminate as such. Whatever the rate is the rate for everybody. Yeah,
correct, Tony. So that is correct. In terms of reducing a rate, let's say that's currently 10% down to 0%, you're probably looking at a free trade agreement. So a free trade agreement, obviously, we have one with the European Union, or we have one with Chile or Canada and so on and so forth. Then if that rate is 0%, then obviously it would only cover that free trade agreement. If we were to 0% as a whole, then that rate would be applicable to an import from China or an import from the US. Spot on.
Okay, thank you. We invite the audience to for any more questions. Anybody else? I'm not too sure whether we've scared people off there, Andy, or whether they are just taken aback by all these things that they need to do in the next 4 weeks. Although that said, most were prepared from the poll that we had. We're partially prepared. So we have a question here. From your experience, what aspects of changes from 1st of January are SMEs, from your experience, Andy, working with SMEs, what are SMEs least prepared for?
What are they? Yeah. So what we found is quite a lot of our clients only dealt with the European Union, whereas as the companies that obviously dealt with third country exports, for example, were more prepared in terms of documentation. So whereas now obviously the European Union will be classed as a third country for UK exports, you are now finding these SMEs where obviously they were only dealing with the European network or the European sales, so to speak, are now having to look at their documentation, now having to look at the Incoterms, now having to look at the rules of origin for their products, because the rules of origin didn't apply in terms of moving goods to the European Union. Whereas from January onwards, not only do we have documentary changes whereby your invoices would have to have obviously the Incoterms on the invoice, you'd have to have the country of origin, because obviously there'll be duty and VAT applicable. You would also have to have the commodity code of the product on your invoice. You would also have to have the EU EORI number of your client on your invoice, and that is in order to enable smooth transition from the goods leaving from Calais into the European Union, whereby an agent or haulier who's moving the goods for you will have to do a pre-import entry into Calais, for example. So if you didn't have the EU EORI number of your client on your paperwork, then the likelihood is they will be in touch with you to get that information, which could well be 11 o'clock at night when a vessel is leaving Calais, Dover, for example. So in terms of changes and concerns, I think that's the most concerning part, is obviously SMEs only dealing with the European Union, and now having these big documentary changes, where you have to obviously have to be prepared and be aware of these changes, and still we're in a waiting game to find out if there's a deal or no deal. But like I said, unfortunately, import and export entries will have to be raised still. So that's one of the concerns we've found, Tony.
Okay, on a related matter, for services, so some companies do sell their services as well. For those companies who are not selling services which are not regulated, let's say consulting services, does that go on as normal for them?
We don't know, Tony. It depends on if there's a deal or no deal. We're still waiting for clarification in terms of services. I mean, supply of services will change because obviously we're outside of the European Union, in terms of charging VAT. Because obviously the supply of services, rulings on the VAT notices will be changing from January onwards.
So the reverse charge may not apply any longer.
I'm not aware, Tony, of the current changes. We're still waiting to find out, and re-releases of information from HMRC. But again, I'm hopeful that within what we are now, 3.5 weeks time, that we get more clarification from HMRC.
Okay, thank you. Just some further. Related question is: are SMEs engaging people, experts like yourself, to help them through the new requirements? I guess they must be, because you're always busy.
Yeah, we are crazy busy at the minute. Currently, I think we are training every single day clients of import and export entries. So that's one thing that we are very, very, very busy on. I will be obviously advising you there are government grants for training. So that's one thing to be aware of, and also the employment of staff to raise the import and export entries. And that is available on gov.co.uk. So if you have a look on there, that is one thing that can help you as a business. We are engaging, obviously, services of experts. A lot of our customers are currently, as per my advice and my colleagues' advice, to liaise with their freight forwarders and their agents who's moving the goods, to ensure that everything is in place. In terms of import and export entries, obviously, businesses will now, if they're only exporting to the European Union, will now have to go through documentary changes. Obviously, you will now need to start looking at the commodity codes of your products, having a list of the commodity codes to ensure that that's on your documentation. Obviously, that's not being a priority currently, with obviously exporters to the European Union. And in terms of other documentation, really, obviously you need to be aware of the changes in terms of exporting. You will need to be prepared that there will be delays at ports. You need to be aware that obviously quite a lot of freight forwarders will be looking at using transit from January onwards. That is an help, and that is an easement to you as a business. So maybe that's one thing that you can look down on. Have a look at the transit information on gov.co.uk, and also speak to your freight forwarder. Ask them, are they using transit to move the goods into the European Union? Quite a lot of them are, due to the fact that they can minimise how much documentation they are raising. And again, speak to your freight forwarder, and I'm sure they will be able to assist you in terms of any further information that they would need. Obviously, they are experts in terms of what is required for a third country export. So go through with them what you would need, what documentation changes they would need, and obviously liaise with them. Have they got transit? If they have, ask them, please, can we use it? It will avoid delays at port. So that is one of the big advantages of using transit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for that incredibly insightful overview. There's a certain amount of information that we just don't know still, which is frustrating, of course, but I think we all appreciate the efforts of experts like yourselves just to, try and help us all navigate through this process as best we can, and hopefully there will be more clarity in a couple of weeks. We are running just up against time here. So Bill, I believe you have one more poll, and then I think we're going to hand it back over to Andrew to wrap up. So if I could encourage everyone to go ahead and respond to the poll that we've got up on the screen now. The main question being, what support do you require from WG and partner organizations? Very helpful to get a sense, obviously, for where WG can invest its resources, notably time, in terms of helping companies to navigate through this upcoming period. Andrew, as the attendees are filling that in, do you want to jump back in and bring us home?
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt, and thanks to everyone today. Thanks, Tony, Andy, and Bill as well. I found that very informative, and I hope everyone on the line did as well. I thought I'd just sort of summarize a couple of key takeaways for me. Tony mentioned earlier on about sort of the old school way of your typical approaches to routes to market, and how that's sort of changing, evolving, modernized, the 21st century sort of e-commerce intervention, etc. But I think it's important to recognize also that in deciding the routes to market, there's a lot of sort of preparatory work before we get to that stage as well. A lot of market research, a lot of time sort of investment from yourselves, resource. And I just wanted to sort of mention that Welsh Government has a range of services, but one of our premium services, working with Kinetic and other key sort of contractors on our framework, can help you, sort of assist you and guide you through, handhold you in this support as well. So for my plea to everyone on the call today, I know there's one or two who have used this premium service and have recognized that support who are on the line today. My colleagues will circulate our email addresses after this and showing you which areas we cover. So I do ask you to get in touch with us because we're here to help. We do have a range of support, and a big thank you to Andy too, because obviously the Brexit sort of overtaken by the pandemic, back to Brexit again, deal, no deal. There's so much going on at the minute. It's warming to hear that so many of you have said, you feel prepared. But of course, again, we've got tailored support services that we can help you in this sort of final sort of push, if you like, over the next month or so. Andy touched on also about sort of wider UK training. Here in Wales, we do have a dedicated training grant as well. Companies in the lead up to sort of with Brexit have taken advantage of this sort of support. Strong and Heard are one of several very good companies on our framework that can help towards accredited courses. So again, please do speak to us if there is anything we can help there. I mentioned earlier about we'll be sending out an evaluation form afterwards. If I can just ask you to complete that and send it back. Your feedback really does mean a lot to us, because these type of events, without your sort of feedback, obviously we wouldn't be doing them, and we want to make them as informative going forward as well. It was mentioned earlier by Tony that the next webinar takes place on the 10th of December. the focus on this is identifying and managing risk. So if you haven't signed up for it, I do encourage you to do so. On that note, I'm going to close the meeting now, and just again, thanks to everyone today, and all the best to everyone, and see you soon. Take care.